So on the 8th of September last year, fire received a call to reports of an explosion and a fire in a residential property in Hastings Close, which is in Bedminster. On attending and dealing with the fire, it was then very apparent that they were dealing with some unusual items within the house that meant that a decision had to be made in terms of securing the scene and also potentially evacuating the residents in the locality. It was approximately 80 people that were evacuated from Hastings Close and Hastings Street, and were left out or displaced out of their homes for between 4 and 5 days. So it was a very complex find. Even though it's a relatively small residential property, there were quantities of high explosive in containers, and to clarify that, in terms of chemicals that were believed to be in those containers that would cause a high explosive. We had pyrotechnic powder that you'd normally see in industrial fireworks, and there were a number of other chemicals. There were a number of crude homemade devices in the shape of arrowheads, also in terms of like hand grenades, very crudely made, but clearly we were dealing with a picture that we didn't know exactly the content and more worryingly the impact if any of that was to go off. It's one of those tricky ones within policing, when you sometimes come into this type of environment where you come into a household and you don't know what you're actually dealing with. But we were able to do a criminal investigation. It was a very prolonged searching of the address, simply because of the complexity of what we were finding, and to ensure that we kept the safety of the responders and those that were dealing with the searches, but also with the residents locally. So what we had to do is really painstakingly search through. The dangers that we found from that, obviously, is that if some of the explosives had joined together or there was a further fire, we could have been dealing with a much wider issue in terms of risk to other people. It's hard to say, because they were obviously in containers or were kept. We know certainly from the individual that something had gone wrong in terms of what he was handling at the time to have caused the explosion in the first place, which caused severe burns to him anyway. So we were very mindful of that and how our approach was. So we had to do it very much in a coordinated way, and we very much used the multi-agency response. So we had the fire service there, we had South West Ambulance there, we had the ordnance team out to carefully consider, as items were taken from there, what danger they posed to us as responders, but equally to the community. It's hard to sort of get into the mind of the individual themselves, but certainly from what we got, we gradually got an informed picture that we were dealing with an isolated case. This was an individual that had a very big interest in world-type disasters. There were items that were taken from the address that would suggest that he was preparing himself, possibly as self-defense, in terms of a disaster that would present itself, on a world basis, where he would deem that he would have to survive. So, like of a survivalist nature. So there were the military rucksacks, there were ration packs under his bed. So we very quickly then formed a view that we were dealing with this as an isolated case, but actually also had to balance the fact that there was a huge risk to the community should any of this explosive go off.